Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Saturday, August 14th. We're breaking down the split slate day that we have over on DraftKings today. We have a 5-game early slate that starts around 4 p.m. Eastern. Then we have the main slate tonight that starts around its normal time at 7 o'clock. That would include 10 games, and both slates actually look pretty good today, so we'll be breaking down both. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. And if you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that if you do want access to some extra content. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, you can use code CPENN and get a free money bonus as an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers, then move on to the bats. And we'll start with the early slate guys here, and I only have two listed. It's Chris Sale at $9,600 and Zach Thompson at $6,800. I do want to mention that Luis Castillo was on the slate, and you could play him. It's just the matchup versus Philly kind of scares me a little bit, and I think I'd rather spend up for Chris Sale over him. But anyway, we'll start with Chris Sale here, $9,600. He's looking like the SP1 on the early slate. The matchup versus Baltimore versus lefties, they're actually pretty solid, but it's still Chris Sale is making his return since like 2 years ago. He hasn't pitched in forever. He's been hurt. So I can't imagine he's going to go super deep into this game. Like, we're not going to see 100 pitches out of Chris Sale. That's just not going to happen. I mean, if it does, I'll be more than happy. I mean, he's below $10,000. I think he's actually a pretty good value today. But he eclipsed over 80 pitches in his last start in rehab assignment. So assuming we could see maybe like 80-90 pitchers here and at $9,600, I think that's just fine. He should have over a 30% K rate here, only a 3.6 implied team total against him. Very heavy favorite. Boston stack looks really good in the early slate. They should be able to smash Jorge Lopez, probably score like 5-6 plus runs in this game. I'd be very shocked if they don't. He has an 8K prop over in Vegas, and like I said, probably going to be on a bit of a pitch count here, but the fact that he's below 10K, it actually looks like some pretty good value. And I mean, I am all about Chris Sale here. He's my SP1 in the early slate. You could obviously always play Luis Castillo, but I'm very excited to play Chris Sale. He's one of my favorite pitchers in baseball to watch. He's got a weird arm delivery. He's got a nasty slider. You can sign me up for some Chris Sale on the early slate today. Then as a cheap SP2, we have Zach Thompson at $6,800. Obviously not the best pitcher out there, but I'm assuming this is going to be a very low-scoring game, which I'm sure most of you thought that was what the case would have been last night, but it ended up being like the highest-scoring game on the slate. The Marlins scored 11 runs in the second inning yesterday. It's weird. I mean, these are two of the worst offenses in the baseball. They pretty much traded everyone good they have at the trade deadline. For the Cubs, no Javier Baez, no Anthony Rizzo, no Chris Bryant. The Marlins lost Starling Marte. I mean, both these offenses are truly terrible. But, I mean, that's just baseball sometimes. I mean, weird teams can just absolutely pop off. That's what we saw yesterday. But assuming that doesn't happen again, this is one of the best places to pitch in all baseball. Miami, only a 3.5 implied team total against him. When he first came up this year, he actually showed some strikeout upside that's kind of faded away a little bit, but he still has around a 23% K rate. The walks are an issue, double digits at 10.2%, but he doesn't give up too much power. Only a 135 ISO given up with the lean to the ground balls. Hard contact rates above 32%, but less than a homer allowed per 9. And like I mentioned earlier, this Cubs lineup is truly quite terrible at this point, and they do struggle versus right-handed pitching. So at $1,600, pitcher-friendly park, as long as he gives like a run or two and has like 5+ strikeouts at $1,600, I think that's a fine way to go. If you can afford Castillo as your SP2, I'd have no problem with that whatsoever. But assuming you're going to try to load up on the Boston bats and the Reds bats and some other teams we'll talk about, it might be kind of hard to double spend up for a pitcher on the early slate. But with that being said, we'll move on to the late slate guys. And we have Walker Buehler at $10,600. He's the most expensive pitcher of anybody today when you combine both slates. But pretty good spot here versus the Mets. And Walker Buehler has just been consistent all season long, only a 3.5 implied team total against him. Pretty heavy favorite. I mean, he's got the Dodgers offense behind him, so he's always going to be a favorite pretty much every single time he's on the mound. And a 7.5 K prop. Looking at his numbers this season, his xFIP in Sierra about a 1.5 higher than his ERA. So I mean, regression is due for him. But I mean, I don't think it's going to happen here versus the Mets. 2.13 ERA, 26.5% K rate, which when you're paying nearly $11,000 for a pitcher, I'd like it to be around the 30% mark, but 26.5 isn't too bad. He doesn't walk a ton of guys. He limits the power, has a lean to the ground balls, doesn't give too much hard contact, less than a homer per 9. I think he'll be just fine in this spot if you got the money for him. Luis Garcia, $9,900, pretty soft spot here versus LA. I love the Houston stack on the late slate today, so assuming he can pick up the win here, that 4-point bonus can always go a long way. And on the season, he's actually got a pretty good K rate, close to 30%, 3.5 Sierra, 3.6 xFIP. He's actually got some pretty similar numbers to Walker Buehler, and he's $700 cheaper. So if you can't quite get up to Walker, I have no problem dropping down to Garcia here. I mean, outside of Shohei Ohtani, you're not really concerned about anybody in this LA lineup. And then Joe Musgrove, $9,100. He gets the soft matchup here versus Arizona. They've been pretty terrible versus right-handed pitching this season. They're actually somewhat okay versus lefties, but they have struggled versus righties. 3 3/4 of an implied team run total here. Pretty heavy favorite, 6.5 K prop. Looking at his splits on the season, they're actually good. I mean, I know early in the season he was a lot better than he has been lately, but he's actually had 2 pretty solid starts recently. A 3.45 xFIP, 3.45 Sierra, over a 28% K rate. He limits the walks, he limits the power, he gives a lean to the ground balls, he doesn't give up too much hard contact, about a homer per 9. If we're looking at Arizona's splits versus right-handed pitching this season, they don't really strike out a ton, 24.5% of the time, but only a 134 team ISO, an 80 WRC plus, and a 293 WOBA. $9,100 feels a bit pricey, but I think Joe Musgrove is definitely an excellent SP2 option on today's slate. I think he's a very overall safe option as well. If you want to get a bit crazy here with the cheap SP2 in the late slate, we have Kenta Maeda here at $6,700. And the matchup is pretty scary versus Tampa. They have plenty of power in their bats. Nelson Cruz, Brandon Lau, Austin Meadows, even G-Man Choi, Randy Arena. Like, this is a pretty loaded lineup, but they will strike out quite a bit. Now, they strike out more versus lefties than they do versus righties, but I feel like at this price point, there's a little bit of upside. Now, we can't assume Maeda's going to come out here and throw just a shutout. He'll probably give up a run or two, probably a homer or two, but they are striking out close to 26% of the time versus righties. Now, the other numbers are fantastic, and Minnesota, it can kind of be a scary park to pitch in sometimes, but 4.5 implied team total here, but a 6K prop. His numbers on the season over a 25% K rate, 3.87 xFIP, Sierra below 4, much better than ZRA that is approaching 5, but I can get behind Maeda just because of the price point. Doesn't allow a lot of hard contact, only 28.7% of the time, but in the power department, close to 180 ISO and about 1.5 homers per 9. So let's just say he gives up homers to Brandon Lau and maybe a Nelson Cruz or an Austin Meadows. As long as those are solo shots or he doesn't give up more than like 3 or 4 runs, if he gets like a handful of strikeouts and goes like 5 or 6 innings, I think at $6,700 Maeda might be a decent value play on today's slate, even though it is a kind of a scary matchup versus the Tampa Bay Rays, especially when they get away from the Trop. But I think that'll be pretty much it for the pitching for the most part, so we can move right over to the bats. Start with the early slate teams, and only have a few to talk about, but we'll start with the Boston Red Sox here in a great matchup at home at Fenway Park versus Jorge Lopez, a guy that really struggles with left-handed bats, and we got quite a few good options here on this Boston team. We can still use the righties, just know that he's a little bit tougher on the righties, but I mean, everybody's in play here. Kike leading off, $4,600. Alex Verdugo, if he's hitting the 2-hole once again, I think we could see Kyle Schwarber there soon. I know he's brand new to the team, so maybe that's why he's a little bit lower in the order, but I think Schwarber should probably swap to Verdugo at some point. But at $3,500, if he's still in the 2-hole, I mean, I think that's pretty good value for a guy that can hit right-handed pitching pretty well. Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers. Devers is one of the top home run calls the entire slate. I know he absolutely bombed yesterday, did absolutely nothing, but that's baseball sometimes. Like, Devers did nothing, and the Marlins scored like 2 touchdowns. Like, that's the craziness of baseball sometimes, but Rafael Devers has crushed right-handed pitching for a couple seasons now. Jorge Lopez struggles with lefties. I love Devers in the spot. They have a team total like at nearly 6.5 at this point. I mean, they should be able to go bombs away versus Lopez. Gio Martinez, Kyle Schwarber. I mean, Schwarber before the break was absolutely killing it before he got hurt. Over a 300 ISO on the season. I think it's an excellent spot for Schwarber. Bobby Dalbec, Christian Vasquez, Jarren Duran. These guys are kind of lineup fillers for the most part, but they are pretty dirt cheap. And I mean, they're viable options if you just need some cheaper pieces of a good offense today. And then dropping down to the Cincinnati Reds here on the road in Philly versus Matt Moore, who really struggles with right-handed bats. And Jonathan India, Nick Castellanos, Tyler Stevenson, Kyle Farmer, Eugenio Suarez, and Aquino all look like excellent options on today's slate. If we look at Matt Moore's splits versus righties this season, it's pretty ugly. I mean, versus lefties, you could still use a guy like Jesse Winker and Joey Votto in tournaments because people are going to skip over them because it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, but I can't imagine Matt Moore will be in this game super long. But if you look at his splits versus righties this season, it's pretty bad. Over a 7.5 ERA, xFIP close to 6, giving up a 305 ISO, 409 WOBA, 47% fly ball rate, and 2.5 homers allowed per 9. So, I mean, all the righties in the lineup look like fantastic plays. If I had to pick my favorite, Nick Castellanos, his price has definitely gotten back up there. I remember when he was like in the, was it the upper 3K range or the low 4K range? Well, they've certainly kind of caught on to that, but he has crushed left-handed pitching. Really a 250 ISO and a 310 batting average is around 1,000 OPS. So, love all the righties here. They're on the road. I wish they were in Great American Small Park, one of the best places to hit. But since they're on the road, you get those guaranteed nothing at bats, and they have a team total close to 5.5 today. The last team I want to talk about here is the Atlanta Braves versus Patrick Corbin, who can be a very hit or miss pitcher. When he's off his game, he can certainly get shelled. And we have a team total above 5 here. And a lot of these guys do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Ozzie Albies, he crushes lefties. Jorge Soler, I mean, his batting average is pretty terrible. He does strike out quite a bit, but he's got a decent ISO versus them this season. I should actually probably pull up their splits when we talk about them, huh? So Ozzie Albies, a 257 ISO versus lefties this year with a 321 batting average. Jorge Soler, a 309 ISO. Freddie Freeman, we prefer him versus righties, but if you're doing a full-on stack, I wouldn't leave Freddie off because he should be just fine. Austin Riley, a 258 batting average with a 307 WOBA but a 157 ISO. Not as good as numbers as you really expect. He's actually been a little bit better versus righties this season, but I mean, obviously you can play him in a righty and lefty matchup versus Corbin, Dansby Swanson, Adam Duvall. Jock Peterson kind of sucks versus lefties, but again, if you're full stack and he's a contrarian option there. Then Travis d'Arnaud, like him versus lefties, he homered last night, and I mean, if you're just looking for a catcher option on a good team, I think d'Arnaud is fine, but I think the Braves do grade out pretty well versus Corbin. If you're looking at his numbers versus right-handed bats this year, the ERA is around 6.5, xFIP close to 5, a 229 ISO, 35% hard contact rate, and over 2 homers per 9. So the Braves, while their team total isn't quite as high as the Cincinnati Reds or the Boston Red Sox today, I think they make for a decent secondary stack. I mean, I don't like them quite as much as the other teams, but I think they're in a very good spot today, and they shouldn't have quite the ownership as well. Then moving on to the late main slate tonight, we have the Houston Astros as my favorite stack versus Jaime Barria, just a pitcher that doesn't have a big strikeout rate, only 12% on the season. His walk rate's actually pretty close to his strikeout rate, and we can use either lefties or righties here. The entire lineup is in play. My favorite plays would be Michael Brantley, Jordan Alvarez, Kyle Tucker, just those lefty and righty matchups, but again, like I said, all the righties are certainly in play here. Altuve, he's below 5K. Carlos Correa's in the 3K range now. And then Diaz, McCormick, Taylor Jones, Maldonado, those are all kind of like lineup fillers, but they're fine if you just want cheap pieces to a good offense. And if you are double spending up for a pitcher today, some of those guys just to get a cheap piece, I mean, might be able to make that work. But all the Astros make plenty of sense here. Team total 5.6. Michael Brantley just continues to be way too cheap for some reason. Like, there is no reason he should be the same exact price tag as Diaz. I know Diaz has been solid this year, but Michael Brantley's batting 332 with a WOBA close to 400 this year. Like, whatever it is, Michael Brantley just gets so disrespected from DraftKings each and every single day here. Massive value. Pretty much my favorite play on the main slate as far as bats goes once you factor in their prices and things like that. But if we're looking at Barria's splits on the season, I mean, he's got a 12% K rate, walk rate close to 10%, 52 ISO going up, which is not terrible, but close to a 40% hard contact rate. Not getting killed in the homer department, but I mean, you can use pretty much anybody here. He's got a 6.5 xFIP versus lefties, versus righties of 4.6 xFIP, only a 13% K rate to righties, and a 3% strikeout rate to left-handed bats. I mean, these guys are going to put the ball in play, so I'm definitely a huge fan of pretty much all the Astros here, and the lefties look very, very good with that low strikeout rate, and Michael Brantley's a guy that doesn't really strike out either way anyway. And then moving on to the Padres here, they get a pretty good matchup versus the lefty Tyler Gilbert and a pretty bad Arizona bullpen. I can't imagine Gilbert's going to last too long into this game, so once they get him out of the game, I mean, the bullpen's not that great either, so I think the Padres are going to be a pretty interesting stack tonight. They have a team total above 5. They're on the road, so you get those guaranteed thing at bats, and quite a few of these guys do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Guys like Tommy Pham leading off. Pretty expensive, close to $5,000, but he's an excellent option here. Manny Machado crushes left-handed pitching. Austin Nola, if you're looking for a catcher that's not an extreme price point, he's fine versus lefties. Will Myers. But the lefties are in play too. Like, they're going to see righties at some point, and they're probably going to see a lot of righties as well. Because, again, I can't imagine Tyler Gilbert's going to last too long into this game. So Adam Frazier, he's cheap. Jake Cronenworth batting cleanup here. I'd be not scared whatsoever to roster him. He's been excellent. He's a good contact hitter. He can hit lefties just fine. So like him, Eric Hosmer, I mean, all these guys are in play for me. Their price tags aren't super expensive, and my projections actually like them quite well to pair with some of that stack we just talked about, the Houston Astros. Like, you can easily play Astros and Padres stack together. Yeah, definitely like them quite a bit here. Team total above 5. It's a good spot versus Gilbert and a pretty bad Arizona bullpen. And the last team I want to talk about here is the Minnesota Twins, who are dirt cheap versus Michael Wacha. They're not overall like one of my favorite stacks today, but they do have a team total close to 5. Michael Wacha is not a very good pitcher, and these guys are just way too cheap in my opinion. Max Kepler leading off versus a righty here. I mean, $4,300, maybe a bit expensive for the way he's been playing this season, which is obviously not great. He's only betting 207, but he's got above a 220 ISO. Brent Rooker, I mean, he's cheap at $2,800. Jorge Polanco, $2,900. Switch hitter out of the platoon advantage here. Has over a 200 ISO on the season, betting 275. I don't think there's a good reason that Polanco should be below $3,000 here. Josh Donaldson below $4,000. $3,600 betting cleanup. A 230 ISO on the season. Arias, $2,600. Dirt cheap here, batting over 300 on the season. Pretty good splits versus righties. Mitch Garver, one of the better hitting catchers in baseball, with a 320 ISO on the season. So no, either strikeout or bust there, but he's $2,900. I mean, these guys are priced like they're facing Jacob deGrom or something, and that's simply not the case today. Michael Wacha's numbers this season, giving up close to 2 homers per 9, a 40% hard contact rate, 186 ISO with only a 20% K rate, with a 5.5 ERA with the 186 ISO given up. I mean, this is a good matchup for the Twins. They have a team total close to 5, and they're all pretty much free for the most part. So if you need to fit in some expensive Padres, maybe some expensive Houston Astros today, even though they're not super expensive, but if you want to fit in like Jose Altuve or something like that, these guys are all free, so you can mix and match them for the most part. And I do want to mention I like a couple of the one-offs over on the San Francisco Giants. Just some of the righties there versus a lefty in Kyle Freeland, but definitely like the price tags on these Twins today. With that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you become an official member over on Patreon, link is down below in the description for that. You can get my entire cheat sheet, which has my position breakdown, not just stacks that I do on here now. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. I know most of you know what it is by now, but it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections and props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, when you use code CPEN, you get a free money bonus up to $100 when you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be pretty much it. I will stop rambling, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend. Or I guess I should say the start of your weekend.